Hi, and welcome to another game replay with Rigel B. My name is Rigel, and today we'll be taking a look at my third round match from a recent Star City Games tournament. If you need to catch up with the previous rounds, or if you're unfamiliar with the Naya deck and would like to go back and listen to my deck tech first, the easiest way to find those is in the Naya playlist. And if you'd like to make sure to catch all my videos as they come out, go ahead and click the subscribe button below. Okay, as these tournaments are played with open deck lists, I'm going to let you take a brief look at my opponent's deck before we get started. As you can see, we're playing against Sultai Ultimatum this round. Wish me luck. Okay, we're here this time playing against Sultai Ultimatum. In this matchup, game one is very difficult, but we can manage to win game one if we can win before they resolve an ultimatum. So if they don't draw that or they stumble on mana, and we manage to get a win before they resolve that, that's how we steal game one. Okay, so this opening hand looks great. We're going to be able to get out to a lot of early pressure, which is what we have to do in order to win before the ultimatum. And we have the perfect start of just Bear Sentinel, followed by turn 2 Clarion Spirit into Heart's Desire to really get an impressive board on turn 2 and really start applying some pressure. Okay, so they get to start ramping, which is not great because that means that they are that much closer to Wrathing and that much closer to Ultimatum. Even though they do have, so this list has 3 Shadow's Verdict and 1 Extinction event, you still want to just deploy as aggressively as possible here. Because you really can't play around the Wraths so much as if you do, you might end up losing to an ultimatum when they didn't have Wrath. So you really gotta just pedal to the metal. So this Elspeth Nightmare is one of the more unfortunate things that can happen, as it might be able to snag my showdown before I resolve it. It's always annoying when their Elspeth Nightmare can snag a showdown of Scalds, because that's the only card in our deck that it can hit. So hopefully we draw a land here and can just cast Showdown of the Scalds to dodge that, which we do. That's an awesome result for us. It would be applying more pressure for us to lay out the Lovestruck Beast, but seeing as how they can hit 5 mana next turn in Wrath, I think this is significantly better. As the Showdown is also going to apply more pressure next turn without overcommitting into a Wrath, just because of its ability to add +1/+1 counters. So we're still going to be able to attack for more damage next turn than we did this turn. Okay, so as far as what the Showdown exiled, we've got some good hits here. Again, thinking about the fact that they could have a Wrath as easy as next turn, I think it's good to prioritize using the Showdown in this situation, as again, that's going to provide more damage next turn without overextending into the Wrath. So I think our best bet here is to use Heart's Desire and Showdown of the Scalds. We'll forego the Edgewall Innkeeper because we're getting plenty of card advantage from the Showdowns, and the other cards provide more aggression. But I think I make a misstep here playing the Showdown first. A lot of times you want to play the Showdown as your first spell because you want to see what it exiles before you decide what your second spell is. But pretty much whatever it exiles, I'm going to want to play this Heart's Desire. And so I should really play the Heart's Desire first, so that then I can tap that token with just Bear Sentinel in order to create mana to cast the Showdown. And what that would do is it would allow me to attack for 1 extra damage this turn, as now I have to tap a token that could have attacked. So that was a slight misstep there, and I miss out on 1 point of damage because of it. But still, things are looking good. They did miss their 5th land drop, which was excellent for me. Even if they hit their 5th land drop and get to Wrath, they still might miss some land drops before getting to their ultimatum. So it's going to give me some extra time to apply the pressure I need. And it looks like they miss one more time. So I'm going to get another big attack in before they get to Wrath. I guess they can at least hit their land drop if they draw it here. But they didn't get to Wrath that turn. So I get another big attack in first, which is an excellent result for me. We go ahead and use the Fabled Passage in order to deck thin. And even knowing that they're going to Wrath next turn, we want to play some of these spells that we exiled with Showdown because they're going to be going away anyways. And we're hoping to get those +1/+1 triggers off of the Showdown so that we can deal more damage this turn. So here we'll get green as we're likely to play just Bear Sentinel, Lovestruck Beast. So we need double green. And as far as what I'm growing here, I'm spreading out the counters just a little bit. I don't want to pile them all on the flyer and then just have a single removal spell like Eliminate and prevent my ability to attack for a lot of damage next turn. This way, basically the only way they can get out of it is with a Shadow's Verdict or an Extinction Event. An Extinction Event wouldn't even be that too good for them. It really needs to be Shadow's Verdict to get them out of this. So we go ahead and play these. Now I decide to build up the flyer just because it'll be able to attack through a Yorion or something like that. But it really doesn't matter. The only way they're getting out of this is with the Wrath now. So where the counters go isn't that impactful. Now here, I decide to go ahead and use the takedown to kill my own Just Bear Sentinel, because the takedown's going away anyways, and I'm not going to cast anything else from my hand as they could Wrath the board next turn. And because they can Wrath the board next turn, most likely, killing my own creature isn't too bad for me. What it does is it enables me to get in for 1 extra point of damage this turn. I don't get to attack with the Just Bear Sentinel, but I do get to put 2 more +1/+1 counters on my creatures. So I net 1 damage out of that transaction. So now they're down to 5. The only way out for them is a Shadow's Verdict, basically. And they go ahead and have that, which we could expect, seeing as how they had a bunch of spells in hand. They were missing land drops. It's pretty likely that they'd have something like that. But we have a lot of gas here. We get to redeploy. And it looks like it's probably going to be a Clarion Spirit into a Lovestruck Beast. Is the best course of action here. Just checking my lands. Sometimes you want to make sure that you have a land to fetch before you play the Fabled Passage, as you can frequently, when you have cards going to the graveyard that you didn't play off of Showdown, or, I mean, to exile, I guess, not to the graveyard. So you definitely want to be careful and make sure you have a land to fetch before you play your Fabled Passage, but otherwise, deck thinning is the best strategy, so I go ahead and do that. And now we're developing to the board, and here I have a decision to make. I've got a pretty good presence, but I have to decide whether or not I want to play a Giant Killer out there as well, knowing that they could just have another Wrath to Wrath my board. But on the flip side, if they just have a single removal spell for, say, my Lovestruck Beast, I want to be able to represent lethal damage anyways. And right now, if they killed my Lovestruck Beast, I'd only be attacking for 4 next turn. And it's much more likely that they just have spot removal than another Wrath, because they started, their deck list has 3 Shadow's Verdict, 1 Extinction Event, and then it has 4 Heartless Act, 2 Eliminate, and then some Binding of the Old Gods. So, given that, I really want to make sure that just a single removal spell on my Lovestruck Beast doesn't buy them an extra turn. So I go ahead and play out the Giant Killer to apply maximum pressure. If they do manage a Shadow's Verdict here, that's going to be pretty bad for me. But it looks like all they can manage is an Elder Gargaroth, which I can win through on the board with the Giant Killer. And I think that they made a slight mistake here, as Shadow's Verdict is really the only thing that's getting them out of this situation. And so they should have used their Mazemind Tome in their upkeep to scry to give them a better chance of getting to that. But we managed to pull off the victory, which is an excellent result for game 1, as it gets much better post-sideboard. We bring in 3 Drannith Magistrates and 4 Redains. These are entirely to stop the ultimatum. If they resolve an ultimatum, that makes our game very, very difficult, almost unwinnable. And so we want to do everything we can to stop that. As far as like the wraths go, we can win through several wraths. We cannot win through an ultimatum, basically. And in particular, their most threatening card that they can play is Kior Best the Sea God, as far as getting off of the ultimatum. The reason being is it's what can really apply some pressure to kill us. If they don't have anything to apply pressure and kill us, we can actually win a really long game with all the card advantage we get off of Toski and Showdown Scalds and Edgewall Innkeeper. So we can win through several wraths just rebuilding. But if they have something that pressures us, which Cure Best the Sea God does very well, that's going to be a problem. So here I'm cutting, it looks like, so first of all, I cut some non-impactful adventures with the Bone Crusher Giant and the Fairy Guide Mother. Normally I would cut a Giant Killer or possibly even 2 in this matchup, but my opponent had 3 main deck Elder Gargaroth, as well as a sideboard Coma and 2 sideboard Pelucranos. So I want to leave the full 4 in there because I think it's fairly likely they could bring even more creatures in. So I'm going to have plenty of targets for those Giant Killers, even when they're a control matchup. So I leave those in. Other things, I trimmed a Tangled Florahedron and a Kabira Takedown. Being on the draw, we don't need quite as much land, and both of those are less effective. The takedowns, they can really manage our creatures, so it's basically just the land. This hand's no good. Like I said, Kabira Takedown's basically just the land, so that was 6 lands and a spell. This one's much better. This one can actually apply some threats, as well as get the card advantage later. I have a decision to make between bottoming Toski or Showdown. I think it's definitely one of the 4 mana spells. And I decide to bottom the Toski, but I'm not sure. It possibly should be the Showdown, because being on the draw, the sequence of them going Elspeth Nightmare, killing my Clarion Spirit, and then snagging the Showdown would be pretty bad for me. So it might be that it's better for me to save the Toski instead of the Showdown. But as far as other things that I cut in sideboarding, I cut a couple Mana Dorks. Mana Dorks are historically bad against Wrath effects. They don't apply pressure. They do help you develop a wide board, which is not exactly what you want. You don't want to deploy all of your threats and have them wrath away all at once. So the Mana Dorks are less effective in these type of matchups. Getting underway, we get to start off with a Heart's Desire. And we're going to go ahead and just develop with the Clarion Spirit and start applying some pressure, even though we don't get to trigger it for a while, and we're exposing it to removal. The Clarion Spirit really isn't as important in this matchup as it is in some matchups, and you saw me trim one in sideboarding. That's because when they have Wrath effects, it really doesn't matter how wide you go as much as in other matchups. So the Clarion Spirit's not as important in this matchup as in others, and we get to go ahead and run it out there. But so far, our game plans, it's going all right. We get to start applying, and we're gonna go ahead and run out this Lovestruck Beast. Cultivate, while it's not great for me as they get a ramp into their Wrath effects, at least it wasn't an Elspeth Nightmare on my Clarion Spirit, which could snag a Showdown. So there's that silver lining. Having drawn another Showdown, maybe I wouldn't have minded so much. Even though they could ramp into a Wrath here, I go ahead and run out the Lovestruck Beast. You really have to make them have it in these type of situations. You can't win just attacking for 3 a turn. And they do have it. So we're going to have to rebuild. Here we draw a land, and we have to decide between Toski and Showdown. Even though Showdown doesn't apply any pressure to the board this turn, I think it's the better play, as they're sitting over there on 5 mana, and if I want to be able to play a disruptive spell before they can play an ultimatum, for instance that Redain or Draenith Magistrate, I need to play the Showdown this turn in order to be able to play that spell next turn. Okay, so they get a Vorinclex out, which is going to apply a lot of pressure here, and I have some decisions to make, because I have Giant Killer that can kill it, and maybe I should have had a stop in my upkeep, so I could have decided whether or not I wanted to kill it upkeep and get the Showdown trigger, but as it is, I actually would not have done that, because I'd prefer to have that Showdown trigger next turn, or on some future turn when I can put +1/+1 counters on creatures. And so I have to decide between using this giant killer to kill a Vorinclex or casting the Redain. And I prioritize casting the Redain, even though Vorinclex is causing some problems here. I really can't survive an ultimatum, so I want to get this Redain down on the board. And then the only other question is whether or not I cast this giant killer from exile or whether I cast the Tangled Florahedron. And even though having the giant killer out there might be useful because then I could tap the Vorinclex in future turns, I think it's likely that I'll just use this other giant killer in hand to kill the Vorinclex, so I don't need that as much. Developing my mana, I feel like that's going to be pretty useful, as I have a bunch of expensive spells in hand, and I really want to be able to cast as many spells as I can next turn. Here I go ahead and put the stop in my upkeep so that I can decide if I want a giant killer the Vorinclex in my upkeep in order to start getting the showdown triggers next turn. They go ahead and kill my Redain, which is unfortunate because now I don't have protection against the ultimatum, and they're really pressuring my life total, which is putting me in a tough situation. Okay, Cultivate, that's not so bad. So now they only have one unknown card in hand, which is, you know, not terrible for me. I decided I don't want to have that showdown trigger right now. I'd prefer to have it on a future turn, so I go ahead and draw first. And in fact, the play I make here is I know that I'm going to cast Giant Killer and Showdown this turn. And normally you would want to kill that Vorinclex first so that your Showdown actually does something. But I would actually much prefer exiling all these cards next turn when I have mana. Basically, it's gonna have those cards exiled for an extra turn. I'll have next turn and the following turn to cast those cards, as opposed to this turn when I'm already going to be tapped out and next turn. So by going Showdown first and then killing the Vorinclex, and I go ahead and give them the oops, letting them think that maybe it was a mistake that I played the Showdown, not realizing the Vorinclex could do that. Just, being a little misleading. But this is actually the order that I wanted to do those in. Now here, the Kiora Best the Sea God, this is a serious problem as I'm sitting at 8 life and it's going to tap all of my blockers. So in this type of situation, really the only hope I have, there's no way I can play blockers on their turn. There's no way I can deal with the 8/8. The only hope I have is if I can get them to chump block with their 8/8. But with them at 16 life, there's no way I could really do that. I would have to cast 8 spells this turn to make my Tangled Florahedron a 17/17. And discounting the Tangled Florahedron, I only have 7 mana, so it's really going to be difficult to cast 8 spells. So we go ahead and give them the good game and concede. Cure Best the Sea God, as you can see, it poses a lot of problems. Okay, there's not much for us to do here in sideboarding. We're gonna leave it the same as we did after game 1. Okay, going to game 3. We're really hoping that we can execute our game plan of preventing ultimatum, and if we manage to prevent ultimatum, it's a lot harder for them to apply pressure to us. Here, that game they had a Vorinclex and a Kiora, but each of those are cards that they only have one of in their deck. So their deck is just a lot less threat dense if they can't resolve an ultimatum. They have these random one of threats sprinkled throughout, but if they don't draw one of those, then we should be able to manage fairly well. And this hand, so it's got some good things and some bad things. The bad things, we don't have white mana, we don't have a third land. The good things are we have some really impactful spells. We have the Lovestruck Beast, which can apply a decent amount of pressure. We have the Clarion Spirit, which can do the same. And we have the disruptive element of Redain, which is going to be really important. We can use it either to stave off their wraths if we're applying a good amount of pressure, or we can hold off and use it to prevent their ultimatum if that's the path we have to take. So far we haven't drawn a land, but we did draw this Edgewall Innkeeper, which if we draw a land next turn is really going to help because we can play that Lovestruck Beast and get a trigger off of it, which should help us hit our future land drops. So now we just have to really cross our fingers and hope that our deck delivers us, has mercy on us. Let's see what they end up doing here. Okay, so they're ramping. That's a good result for them. We hit our land. Our overwhelming faith in our deck really pays off. And it treats us well. So we get to keep developing our game plan and get an aggressive start going, as well as having the disruptive elements. And we're in line to hit another land drop next turn, so that's great. Okay, they're forced to use a removal spell here on the Lovestruck Beast, which, you know, that's not too bad, as anytime they have to use removal spells before their Wrath, it's a win for us. Although, you know, we wouldn't mind getting damage in and them not having a Wrath. But so here, as far as what we're going to develop with next, I choose to go with the Toski, as it's going to survive a Shadow's Verdict to leave me with something to keep attacking. And I get to start drawing cards off of it right away, which is excellent. Running out the Redain is another thought, but with them being able to Shadow's Verdict, I guess they wouldn't be able to if I put the Redain out there, but say they kill it with a Binding of the Old Gods or some other removal spell, I kind of want to slow roll the Redain a little bit. Here, playing out the Toski, I've got a board where I really don't mind if they use a Shadow's Verdict, so I don't need to prevent a Shadow's Verdict with a Redain. And like I said, the Ultimatum's the most important thing, so I want to try to make sure that my Redain is out there basically the turn before they could cast an Ultimatum. So here they're ramping, which means that they're going to have, assuming that they have another land in hand on top of this one, it means they're going to have Ultimatum mana next turn. So I do definitely want to play the Redain this turn. And we'll decide what else we want to play, knowing that with 7 mana, they would be able to Shadow's Verdict us or Extinction Event us. So we'll sort of decide how much we want to play into that. And given that we have so much card advantage from everything else, I think we want to just apply maximum pressure and deploy both of our as many threats as we can. Here they Heartless act my Edgewalling Keeper, which is an excellent result for me, because that means that they can't Heartless act my Redain end step. If they had left that mana up and I go Clarion Spirit into Redain, they could Heartless act my Redain end step and they would have their mana freed up to cast a 7 mana Ultimatum or Cure Best God or whatever they might have in their deck. So the fact that they felt pressured into killing that to deny me cards and save 1 point of damage ended up playing out really well for me. So now we're just deciding how much we want to play into a Wrath. And like I said, I think with so many cards in our hand, we can just go ahead and apply the maximum pressure, hoping that they don't have a Wrath. And, you know, it's not entirely impossible for them to not have one. After sideboarding, they had an extra Extinction Event they could bring in, so they have 3 Shadow's Verdict and 2 Extinction Event at this point. Shadow's Verdict is going to leave me with a Toski. Extinction Event's going to leave me with a Redain. Both of them aren't the end of the world. But if they have neither, I really want to get as much going on the board as I can. So here they do have the Extinction Event, but you know, I'm left with Redain, which is stopping their Ultimatum, which is great for me. I really like being left with this Redain on the board. And all these cards in hand I get to rebuild pretty easily. Here it looks like we're going to go Edgewalling Keeper into a Lovestruck Beast, which is going to, after our attack with Redain, they're going to be down to 8. So Innkeeper plus Lovestruck Beast is going to put 8 power on the board. That's going to be our best line. So then after that, we just have to decide, do we also want to run out Giant Killer? Because Giant Killer could tap down a blocker if they end up putting out a blocker and having nothing else. In the end, I decide that it's not necessary, because as far as blockers that they can put out there, a lot of them will just die to Giant Killer from my hand, so I don't think I need to do that. I should have possibly considered playing a takedown as a land here, so that next turn I could play an untapped land from my hand and have access to more mana. This Shepherd of the Flock is an excellent draw. I'm definitely going to leave that up to protect my Redain. If they have another Wrath, I really want to be able to bring that Redain back and continue using it to prevent their ultimatums. But yeah, I should have thought before playing my land. I hadn't decided whether or not I was going to play out a Giant Killer. In the end, I decided not to play it. So the takedowns, they really aren't that effective in this matchup, as they continue to kill my creatures. So the takedown's really not going to kill any of their big creatures. And I should probably have played it out as a land, one of them at least. So here we get to save our Redain. They did have a Shadow's Verdict, which is unfortunate, but we still have stuff we can keep rebuilding with. Drawing a Clarion Spirit is a great result, as we're just going to rebuild this board super quick. And now we'll notice that if I had played the takedown as a land last turn, I could play the Shepherd of the Flock on top of this stuff that I have played already, which would be putting 8 power on the board again. So that slight misstep of not playing the takedown as a land last turn cost me the ability to develop again. And of course, they could have another Wrath, but they've already used 2, and it's not entirely likely for them to keep having Wraths. Here they get to play out a Gargoth. That's just fine with me because I have all these Giant Killers just waiting for it. It's an excellent result. So now, let's see, we have access to 8 mana. 4 of it's going to go to Giant Killer and playing the Giant Killer. And then we have Shepherd of the Flock and Gigantha as other things we can spend our mana on. And I guess there's no guarantee that we want to run out the Giant Killer. We could go Shepherd of the Flock here and bring back Gigantha. That might be a lot more effective as far as using my mana. But I decide that rather than just playing the Shepherd of the Flock and bringing back Gigantha, there is some value in having this Giant Killer out there on the board, as assuming they don't have a Wrath again, the type of things that they might be able to do could be like cast an All-Run's Epiphany into bringing Yorion to hand and casting it, providing 3 blockers. And if I go if I cast Giant Killer right now and Shepherd of the Flock and then play a land, I'm going to have access to Kabira Takedown on their turn. So I could take down one of the 1/1 flyers. And then on my turn, I could Giant Killer the Yorion and tap down the last flyer to present lethal. So this is sort of planning for what's the worst case scenario if they don't have a Wrath. And to me, that was Alrund's Epiphany into playing Yorion. In this line that I took, I'm still presenting lethal through all of that. So it really forces them to have another Wrath, which they've already used 2. And so it's just getting more and more unlikely for them to have one. Unfortunately, they do. So now we're actually in a pretty difficult spot, but we have an excellent draw in this Showdown of the Scalds. And so now I have a decision to make, because I could bring back Gigantha and play it out there, which a 5/5, you know, when they're at 5, is pretty good. But it would die to just a single removal spell. Like, they could crack their Omen in the upkeep and search for a Heartless Act or whatever. I think it's much more important for me to cast the Showdown with the idea of, first of all, we can get a lot of threats off of it, and second of all, we can get something that would disrupt an ultimatum. Like, we have no idea if that last card in hand is an emergent ultimatum, and so playing the Showdown gives me a chance of hitting Drannith Magistrate or Redain. And I think that that's a much more important priority here than presenting lethal next turn. This, as it turns out, also presents lethal next turn because I do put a creature on the board, and in combination with the +1/+1 counters that I can get off the Showdown, it will actually present lethal next turn. It looks like all they can manage here is bringing back the Yorion and casting it to blink their Omen. So they do have a blocker, but I have this Giant Killer. There's one in exile just face up. So they can't be feeling good about the line that they've been forced to take here. And in fact, if they don't find anything like a piece of removal here, they're just gonna die to my Redain after I kill the Yorion, put a counter on the Redain, cast the Showdown, put a counter on the Redain, cast the Giant Killer, put a counter on Redain. So, but it's possible they do a Heartless Act or an Eliminate, so we've still got to play the game here, see if they manage to have anything or not. And they give us the good game, which most likely means that we're going to win. They could be just saying that, even if they have an Eliminate. Some people like to be deceptive in that manner. So we go ahead and play the rest of the game here. We're putting the counters and making it lethal. And here we draw a Drannith Magistrate, which is great in the event that they do have an Eliminate for our Redain. We're also going to get this Drannith Magistrate on the board to prevent Emergent Ultimatum, which is one of the ways they can get out of this. But as it is, we build up our Redain and attack for lethal. And there we go. We got the victory. We get to go 3-0. We're getting pretty excited about this. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I really hope that you'll join me for the next round. To find all the rounds for this tournament, you can check out my Naya Sky playlist. And if you want to catch all my videos as they come out, go ahead and click the subscribe button below. Okay, see you next time.